That's what I'm doing wrong. There I am. Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our 9th installment of the Israel Travelogue. Trying a different program tonight, so we will see how it goes. I'm pretty sure that I got sound going through there, but if you just see my lips flapping and you don't hear any noise coming through on your end at all, go ahead and message me, because it comes up right there. I can see it, and so actually makes a little bloop sound. So yeah, I think that we should be good to go. What we're doing tonight is we are going to kind of going along with the theme of Easter. We're going to try to kind of look at Jesus' death on the cross and his time in the tomb, and then his resurrection. And so on Good Friday, I talked a little bit about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the place where basically both of those things took place. And so that was one thing that I noticed about Israel, maybe more than anything else, that really kind of threw me, was how small everything was and how close together everything was. Thank you for letting me know that you hear me. I was getting ready to try to fire it up on my phone. But and so when we got there, it floored me how it only took about 45 minutes to get from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, given it was the Sabbath, and so there was absolutely no traffic in Israel. There never is on the Sabbath. And so, it took us 45 minutes to get there. When we were there, it floored me how close everything was, how small the old city of Jerusalem itself was, how when we got to Galilee, it kind of floored me that it only took us about an hour and a half to drive from Jerusalem to the Sea of Galilee. It floored me once we were up there how small the Sea of Galilee was, that I could see all the way across the Sea of Galilee to the other side. I could see all the way up to the top of the Sea of Galilee. I could see all the way down to the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. Everything was just so small. When we were standing in Gethsemane and looking across at the old city of Jerusalem, it was like it'd take 5 minutes to walk there. And so that was one thing that kind of threw me, was how small everything was. I still wasn't ready or prepared, I guess, for it when we got to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I was told within this one cathedral was the place where they were 99% sure Jesus was crucified and Jesus was laid in a tomb. And so we're going to kind of go through. I'm going to talk about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you were watching on Friday night, Good Friday, then you're probably like, some of this will be a bit of a review for you. But that church, that cathedral, that building is one of the strangest places I've ever been. And I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it while we were there, because it's like a maze. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But yeah, so some of this is going to be review for you if you were here watching on Friday night. And if not, I'm going to be adding in some other stuff too. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Now, this is a map that shows kind of where Jesus, this is his last 24 hours, basically. And so it started over here in the upper room. It went, him and his disciples left the upper room. They walked to Gethsemane, which would have taken them about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. There Jesus prayed. He was arrested. All that stuff happens, that happens with his arrest. They take him all the way over here, up those steps that I showed you last week that are outside of Caiaphas' house. They took him up those steps, but they went past Caiaphas' house to the house of Annas, who was Caiaphas' father-in-law, I guess you'd call him. It was he was the high priest before Caiaphas. After they leave there, they go back to Caiaphas' house, where he is tried before the Sanhedrin. They then send him to Pilate. Pilate says, send him to Herod. Herod says, send him back to Pilate. The priests and the Pharisees get the people to chant, crucify him. So Pilate signs his death warrant. He is beaten, and he is sent down the Via Dolorosa to the place of Golgotha, or Calvary. And we'll talk more about what those words mean here in just a second. But I wanted to give you an idea of what this looked like. Now, where you see here these pavers where we walked, those pavers are not the pavers that Jesus walked on. Those are about 30 feet higher. In other words, Jesus walked 30 feet below that. Jerusalem was destroyed and rebuilt many, many, many times over the course of its history. And every time that they would rebuild, they would just build on top of the rubble that was there. And so the city would keep rising up. And so what you see here, these pavers, about 800 years old. But this is still the path that they walked, and it'll give you an idea as far as the scale of things. So there we are. We start going down the Via Dolorosa. It's a bazaar now. It is a bazaar. It's a marketplace, and it was incredibly crowded, and there were so many people. A lot of them pilgrims who were there to sort of walk the path that Jesus walked with the cross. A lot of people that lived there. So, just to kind of give you an idea of the stuff that you might see there on the Via Dolorosa. Oh, and here's I just took a video to kind of give you an idea of the hustle and bustle of the whole thing. It would have been a bazaar when Jesus was bringing his cross through there too. I just can't hardly wrap my brain around it. So you get the picture. It's just a alleyway that looked interesting to me more as we walked through. And then it kind of opened up. We went through an arch. This just to give you an idea. This is from the Mount of Olives. And so I'm standing here on the Mount of Olives. That is the Dome of the Rock. It's a Muslim holy site. Probably the third most holy site in all of Islam. You can't see it, but if you could see a little further this direction, what you would be looking at is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the mosque that is built on the site of the Temple Mount. But this is not itself a mosque. It's a shrine, or I don't know exactly, but it's not a mosque. And so it'll give you an idea. The Temple Mount started about here maybe, and went all the way over here and past where you can see and over to there. And it was massive. It took up like a third of the old city of Jerusalem. And when the temple was there, the top of the mosque right here would have reached the top of the doors of the temple, and then the temple went up twice as high as that, up about like that. I show you this to show you back there in the background. You can see this kind of a green thing back there. That's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so Jesus would have been tried by Pilate over in this area. Obviously, Herod's palace is no longer there, but if it was, you would see it about right there. And then Jesus carried the cross all the way over to that place. And it just give you a closer up look of just to give you an idea of how close, all right? And that used to be outside of the walls of Jerusalem. It is now within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, but the law was you couldn't crucify somebody within the walls of the city. So they had to set up the place of execution at Golgotha or Calvary outside of the walls of the city. But you can get an idea, just it wasn't that far. And there's a close-up picture and kind of an aerial view of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, yeah, let me see if I can figure out. We are down kind of in this area, I think. I think that's where we came from. It's hard to tell. Anyway, we're down there somewheres. But here's where we kind of came out into a wider area and turned to the right, and there was this building. And it didn't seem like all that big of a deal to me. I was like, okay, that's interesting. There used to be two doors, and this is almost exactly 1,000 years old, this building. It's been repaired, obviously. The first Christian cathedral was built there by Constantine in like 330 AD, something like that. It was destroyed, I think, twice. So it was destroyed once, rebuilt, destroyed again, and then this one here, this building was rebuilt back in about 1032 AD, and it has just been kind of worked on and repaired since then. But this used to be another door that led in. At one point, when the Ottoman Empire was in control of this part of the world, they walled it up so that there was only one way in and one way out. They did stuff like that often to just kind of try to show the Christians and the Jews who was in charge. So, let's see, is that okay? So here's the picture. You see up there, there's like a ladder, and I think I've talked about this some, but Friday was the first time I really realized this. That ladder, it's called the immovable ladder, and it looks old, right? I mean, it does. It looks old. While we were standing out there in the courtyard, back in this area, over in here, there's our group. You can see our group kind of standing there. As I'm standing there, for whatever reason, every once in a while, you'd just find yourself, Michael Card would be standing kind of in the same area you were. And me and Jonathan were standing together, kind of waiting to go in. And David, our guide, I don't think you can see him here, but he was kind of standing over in this area talking. And we all had these earbuds that we could hear him through. And he's talking about how this church here, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it is got this really interesting history. It's not owned by any one church. It's parts of it are owned by the Catholic Church. Parts of it are owned by the Greek Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church. It's like there's just all these churches, right? 6 of them that all kind of claim their own little piece of turf within the walls of this, what is almost certainly the most holy site in all of Christianity, right? The place where he was both killed and resurrected. And so they all kind of fight over their turf. And because of that, anytime one group does something that might be considered or construed to be like you're trying to take our turf, battles would break out, like bloody battles with swords and knives and stuff back in the Middle Ages. But I mean, just in I think it said it was in 2015 was the last fist fight between monks inside of that building because they were angry at each other over something. And so anyways, that ladder up there is called the immovable ladder. As we're standing out in front of the building, just kind of looking at it, Michael Card kind of leans over to me and goes, "Hey, you see that ladder?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You know how long? Guess how long that ladder's been there?" And I look up there. I mean, it looks pretty old, right? So I think I guessed 10 years. And he goes, "Well, I think I told you the wrong thing on Friday. On Friday, I think I told you 150 years. Turns out that's a low guesstimate. That ladder has actually been there, the immovable ladder, at least since 1728. So it's almost 300 years, which is nuts when you stop and think about it. But let me see if I've got, let's see. Okay, let me go back to this. Oh, come on. All right, let me see. Give me just a second here. I'll be right back. I got a picture I got to show you. I should play like Jeopardy music or something. I don't believe it. I don't think I put the picture in there. Doggone it. How did that happen? Well, it happened. All right. Well. Oh. Okay. All right. I had pictures. The oldest known picture of this ladder is from like the 1850s. And so it looks like a Civil War era picture. It's this church. I mean, it is this church, and it is sitting back there. And you zoom in, and there is the ladder. And then I kept looking, and I found a sketch of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre from 1728 that had this ladder sketched into it, which is just nuts when you stop and think about it. Turns out that like some monk put the ladder there so that he could climb up and clean the windows, and that means they were claiming turf, and so there was this big fight. And so what they ended up coming up with is what they call the status quo. And the status quo among the different churches in the Holy Land basically is nobody's going to move on each other's turf. We're going to leave everybody exactly where they are. And that meant you could not move the ladder. And you could not climb up there to clean the windows. And you can kind of see that they are grody. But yeah, so that's the history of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the immovable ladder. I told you guys at one point, this is actually at the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu, which is the Church of the Cockscrow. And after we had been at the other church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and Michael had told us that thing about the ladder being there for like, I guess he said 300 years. And we were all like, we thought he was messing with us. If you've ever spent much time with Michael Card, and I don't mean to make it sound like I'm his buddy or anything, because I'm not. I just spent 10 days with him in the Holy Land, and so we got to know him a little bit. But you never know when Michael is messing with you. And so we all thought he was messing with us. And so we walked by, and I kind of pointed at the, well, I didn't point at it. I took a picture. It's just this old board leaning up against a wall. It actually says "To the Holy Stairs" right there. That would take you down to the tomb or the dungeon where Jesus was beaten in Caiaphas's house. But leaning up against there is this. It's just this board. So I took a picture of it, and I went up to the guy, my buddy that sat on the bus behind me, and I said, "Hey, Kevin, you see this board? Guess how long that board's been there?" And he said something like 1,000 years or something. We thought that he was really messing with us. Turns out he wasn't. That thing has been there literally at least 300 years. All right, here is first century Jerusalem. There is the temple. Herod's palace is kind of right there. The Antonia fortress, kind of. So anyway, this is where he would have been tried, and then he would have walked the Via Dolorosa to just right about there, which is where now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. That's just a more modern and easy to see map. Jesus tried right there, Via Dolorosa, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we walked in, and I don't know about you. I mean, it's cool to see these amazing cathedrals. I really liked. We went into some very plain, if you could call them that, cathedrals the architecture spoke for itself. We sang in some of them, absolutely gorgeous. And I'll have videos to show you of us singing Holy, Holy, Holy in coming weeks. And in one we're singing, so just different songs. One we sing, This Is My Father's World. One we sing, How Great Thou Art. But when you walk into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it's gaudy is the word that I would use. And I don't mean G-O-D-Y. I mean G-A-U-D-Y. It's just, it doesn't really do it for me. But when you walk in, the first kind of place that you end up is the Chapel of Calvary, which is where 99% sure they crucified Jesus. And I'll just read this. After they had nailed him to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign was fastened above Jesus' head, announcing the charge against him. It read, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. So, go back here real quick. This throwing the dice, they gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. If you were here when I showed the pictures from being in Capernaum, there is a 2nd century synagogue that is there. So it's 1900 years old. And carved into the limestone floor in one of the rooms is a game board. And I wish that I had brought it to show you here tonight. But the only reason I know about it is because Michael happened to come upon me while I was standing in that room. And, there's nothing overhead. It's all, but it's been excavated down to the ground. And there are some walls and stuff. But he comes up, he goes, oh, you want to see the coolest thing in this place? And I was like, yeah. So we walked over, and he pointed down, he showed me that carving. He goes, you see that? And I said, yeah. He said, that's like a game board, like a chess board almost, to play the game Kings. And I was like, okay. And he goes, it's the game that the soldiers were playing as Jesus hung on the cross. And what they do is they roll dice, and you move around this game board, and the plan is that you try to gather a crown, a robe, a scepter, and there's one other thing. I can't remember what the one other thing was. But you could Google it and find out what, the whole thing about the game. But that's what they're doing there. And I've got a picture. Maybe I'll post it when I get home, of the game board in a 2nd century synagogue in Capernaum. But this is the first place that you go when you walk into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is a map of that church. So we walked in right here. I showed you the picture of the immovable cross. That's number 24. Okay, so that's it right there. So you see that before you go in. But once you go in, you kind of go around the corner and you go into it doesn't call it that here, but it's called the Chapel of Calvary. And I'll give you an idea of what it looks like. See what I mean when I say gaudy? Now, I'm not saying this is wrong. A lot of people this is very meaningful for. It just doesn't do anything particularly for me. But you see how it's got a crucifix there, Jesus still hanging on the cross. I don't like that at all, but like I say, a lot of people do. A lot of people find it very meaningful. There's a rock under that glass, and there's a rock under that glass. And then you will see, do I have a picture of that? Yeah, well, let me read this first. Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. And so you see this picture. There's like I don't know what you'd call that, but they have a word for it. And people will crawl underneath it, in between these two rocks, and pray. I think I've got a picture of, maybe not, I guess But we saw somebody doing that when we were there, crawled right underneath there to pray. The reason is because it is believed that in the earthquake, that is where Jesus' cross was, and these rocks split apart. And so this is the place they believe that it happened, right there, which is staggering, really, when you stop and think about it. So where I was showing you before, up top, this is down below. We walked and went down some stairs, and down below you see the outcropping of the rock. Now, the reason that it's so weird now is throughout the centuries, when pilgrims would go and would see it, they all kind of wanted to take back a piece of the rock, so to speak. And so they would chip off a little piece of rock and take it home, or in some cases, a very large piece of rock and take it home. So that now it's maybe 20 feet high, maybe 15 feet high, these rocks. And what's behind them, as it led down to the tomb, is just almost gone. And you'll see that in a minute. That's the other side, the other rock. And so we walked out of there. Let me go back and show you. So we walked out of the Chapel of Calvary, and here we walked kind of around and saw the other side of the rocks. And then we went down some stairs into what's called the Chapel of Adam. Now, the Chapel of Adam, this is like where the rock split. This here is the base of it. And if you traced that crack up all the way through to the top, you would get to the place where they kind of split apart like this. It was believed by the earliest Christians that Adam was buried here, and that his skull was in this area. And when the rocks split, that Jesus' blood flowed down through that crack and covered the skull of Adam. And that's why they believe that Golgotha is called Golgotha, the place of the skull. That's what the word Golgotha means. Calvary, same thing, just in Latin. Calvary means skull in Latin, basically. And so, nobody knew for sure. Everybody was like, well, why would it be called the place of the skull? Now, whether it's true that Adam's skull was buried there or not, it is a really interesting imagery, The guy that brings sin into the world, that as soon as the sin gets brought into the world, God comes and says, I'm sending a rescuer, and he will crush the skull of the serpent, and as the serpent bites his heel. And that's what happens on the cross, right? Jesus' heel is bitten, so to speak, and Satan's skull is crushed. Now, I've heard another really interesting theory for why this place was called the place of the rock, or the place of the skull. And it goes all the way back into the Old Testament, not quite as far as Adam, but to King David. And you've all heard the story of David and Goliath, how, Goliath is Satan's champion, and he is against the people of God, and he comes out and he curses God, and none of the people, none of the Jewish army, the Israelite army, nobody will fight him. And little David comes, and when he hears this challenge, he's like, well, I'll fight him. And so they try to give him Saul's armor. It doesn't fit him because he's a little boy. And he says, no, listen, when lions and bears came to try to take my father's flock, I killed the lion, I killed the bear, and God will deliver me from this filthy Philistine, just exactly the same way. And so he walks down into the valley, picks up a bunch of smooth stones out of the brook, and then he starts walking to meet Goliath. And Goliath comes near and taunts him, and then David does some serious trash talking. And when it's all done, Goliath throws his spear, and he misses. David winds up his sling and lets it go and catches Goliath right in the head, and down he goes, right? I always thought that that's how Goliath died, that he died from the stone, but it turns out he didn't. David walks over, and while he is still just kind of, out of his senses, David picks up Goliath's sword and hacks off his head, and then lifts up the skull, and is showing everybody the skull of Goliath. And everybody on Israel's side cheers, and everybody on the Philistine side groans. And then the Israelites come down the valley and up the other side, and the Philistines are making a run back to Ashdod. And it's just this amazing story, right? It's one of the greatest Sunday school stories ever told. But it turns out, well, is that... Okay, so this will give you an idea of the skull of Adam, okay? This is a replica of an ancient Russian Orthodox icon. And so, it goes back to like the 3rd or 4th century, this belief in the skull of Adam. But David, after he cuts off Goliath's head, he took the Philistine's head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's armor in his own tent. Now, I heard a preacher talk about this one time and say that he thought that might be why this is called the place of the skull. And as a matter of fact, it makes a lot more sense for Goliath than it does for Adam, because Golgotha, Goliath of Gath. It's like, is it a coincidence? Maybe. But if it's a coincidence, it's a big one, right? And the same imagery would be true. Satan's champion skull buried by David, 1,000 years, 1,500 years, 1,500, 1,000. Anyway, a long time before Jesus comes and dies on the cross, David buries Goliath's skull outside of the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Jesus is crucified outside the walls of the Jerusalem at a place called Golgotha. I think it's a really interesting idea. Is it absolutely for sure true? No, but it's a fascinating concept. But that's what this is. This is the chapel of Adam. Oh, and you can see that picture right there is the picture that I just showed you. Interesting. Didn't even know that. So, that's the chapel of Adam. Now you walk out of there. That's another picture of the rock, part of Calvary. So we walked out of there. We walked around a corner. It doesn't show you all of the different levels, but imagine, it's like, imagine a really hilly place, like, hills and valleys, and not massive or anything, but. And then you imagine somebody comes and builds a church building around it. My mom's house that I grew up in, my mom and dad's house, was kind of my house, I guess, when I was growing up in it. It was what they called, had a daylight basement. So it's like you walked in upstairs, but you walked in downstairs, but then you had to kind of go up. So it had a floor down here that wasn't really a basement, but you went upstairs, and then that was on top of this hill that was kind of behind the first set of rooms that you went into. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is very similar. And so, you walk in, and right there is where the cross was. But then you go down the stairs, you go to the Chapel of Adam, you come out of there, you're still downstairs, and you walk over, and this place right here is the tomb. And I know it probably doesn't look like... Oh, I got to point this out first. Over here is the Chapel of Adam, back behind those walls. This right here, let's see, did it have a word for it? The stone of anointing. This is where they believe when Jesus died and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took his body off the cross and laid him down and kind of prepared him initially for burial, that's the stone that they did it on. I didn't even know as we walked by it that that's what it was. I wish so badly that I had. Afterward, Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple of Jesus's because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. When Pilate gave permission, Joseph came and took the body away. With him came Nicodemus, the man who had come to Jesus at night. He brought about 75 pounds of perfumed ointment made from myrrh and aloes. Following Jewish burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with the spices in long sheets of linen cloth. The place of the crucifixion was near a garden where there was a new tomb never used before. And so, because it was the day of preparation for the Jewish Passover, and since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. Now, I guess it makes sense then that it would be so close. But like I said, I had no idea. I pictured this being a long ways away. Like, why would you want to bury somebody? Why would there be a garden tomb so near a place of execution? Doesn't make sense to me at all. But, they didn't check with me first. So, yeah, there's the stone of anointing. Man, I wish I had known. All right, so here we are. This is this thing right here. It's called the edicule, number 5, or ediculi. I don't know how they say it in Latin. What it means is little house, and it's in a massive rotunda. So what they've done is they've built this little chapel around what was the tomb, and then they built this massive cathedral over the top of that. And so that's one of the pretty rotundas. That's the big one. Okay, that's the big rotunda. This is the ediculi. And you'll get a better chance to see a little bit better of a picture here in a second. There's Jonathan standing next to the ediculi. That's it right there. You can see people standing in line. We did not get to go inside and see the tomb because it would have taken, I think he said 3 hours. And so we didn't have that kind of time. And at the time, I wasn't even interested. I kind of wish now that we had gone in and seen it, but, what are you going to do? So there it is from above. People wait in line. They go around. They come in through this way, go into the actual, that's not walking into the tomb there. That's walking into the chapel. And then, as you'll see here in a second, to get into the tomb, you've got to kind of go down and crawl in, and there it is. Okay, so you walk into the little house, the little chapel, and this is what you see. Okay, and I don't know who's in charge of the tomb. I don't know which church it is that's in charge of the tomb, but whoever it is, this is the way they've decorated the outside part. So this is the actual little opening. There would have been a stone that rolled in front of that thing. The stone is gone, has been gone for centuries, but the tomb itself, like I said, people would take away pieces of it, and so it's like instead of being in the side of a mountain now, it is. It's just kind of this weird little, like an outcropping, like its own little hill. But you wouldn't be able to see it when you were inside. Okay, so this is inside of the tomb. This guy has crawled through, kind of back here behind him. He's crawled through. This here is the bench where they laid Jesus' body. Now, what the pointer is on, that is not actually the bench. It's covering the bench. That's a piece of marble that was put there to protect what's underneath. And I think I've got a picture of what's underneath. That's still inside of the ediculi. Okay, there's the bench again. You can kind of see under there some old worn limestone. And here they are. Every once in a while, they'll come in and they'll do something to clean it or do something. I don't know what exactly they're doing. Or maybe they're filming for National Geographic or something. But they've pulled the cover off, and you can kind of see underneath there. And there's these chains. They're holding the thing up because it had, after earthquakes and stuff, it had become less than stable. And so they've got chains so that it doesn't just collapse. But that's believed to be, and like I said, our guide told us 99% sure, the stone bench where Jesus' body was laid. And then you can see the little entrance right there that they would have come in. And I'll show you pictures of tombs that have not been turned into shrines so that you can get an idea of what it actually looked like. That's coming. That's outside of the Ediculi. Cool looking little thing. Okay, so this is outside the walls of the old city. This is a garden tomb that was carved out, that Herod had carved out. So it's a first century, it's contemporary to Jesus. Herod had it made for one of his relatives, like sister-in-law or sister or something. And so to give you an idea, if I stood there, and I'll show you a picture here in a second where I'm standing on top of this stone here. If I was standing right there on the ground, that would come up to about my hip. Okay, so maybe 3.5 feet, and then I would tower above it, right? Now I am tall, but still, again, I was blown away at how small things were. I always pictured the tomb as being this massive cave, right? Where you just walked right on in, and it was just roomy and spacious. But no, this is almost certainly, and you saw how you would have to crawl into the place where Jesus was laid. And so this is kind of to give you an idea of what they looked like, what Jesus' tomb probably looked like when he was laid in it. Very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, they went to the tomb. On the way there, they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside. And so, okay, this is my buddy Kevin, who was sat right behind me on the bus. This is Jean, his wife, who kind of played the role, she played the role of the woman keeping me in check while we were in the Holy Land. She was constantly, kind of hitting me and stuff, pretty much playfully, but, it's like still, she was giving me a hard time to keep me in check. One point, we're driving along, and I've told you how our guide, it was the first time they had done 3 back-to-back-to-back tours, Michael Card and his group. And so they were all exhausted because we were the third group. They had never done that before, and they were worn out. You could tell they were worn out. The first day of our tour, you could tell they were done already. Now, they rallied, because we were so awesome and so much fun, and how could they not? But they were tired, and so he got on the intercom the first day and said something like, a lot of times tour guides will just talk the whole time that you're driving, and that gets really irritating, so I'm not going to do that to you. And Jonathan, my son who was with me, who's been a tour guide, said, oh, good, I'm glad. And he said, so I'll talk to you when we get there. And he put his thing away, and we drove past historic site after historic site, and not a word about it. And Jonathan was like, I would have wished he had talked some, but he didn't. And so what we figured out was we had internet on the bus, and we figured it out after a little while that we could kind of have our map open and see what we were passing. So when we were out in the Judean wilderness one day, where Jesus was tempted, where the people of Israel wandered for the 40 years before they came over the Jordan River into the Promised Land, while we were over there, we're driving along, and all of a sudden we pass this really ornate, really wild-looking building. And I was like, I wonder what that is. So I get out my phone app, and I'm looking at the map, and I see it's Moses' tomb. And I turned around, and I said to this lady right here, Jean, I said, Jean, guess what that place was? And she said, what? I said, it was Moses' tomb. And she goes, get out. And she smacked me, right upside the head. And I could tell she was shocked right after she had done it, that she had done it. But she did it, And so I kind of laughed. I said, whoa, you're going to have to let my wife know you did that. She's going to give you 2 thumbs up. And I could tell she was a little bit embarrassed. And I said, what are you hitting me for? I didn't do it. And she goes, well, pass it on to him, talking about our guide. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. And I told you about the lady a couple of weeks ago when we were at Nimrod's castle at the Mount of Transfiguration, that there was this, 1,000-year-old Crusader era castle that was amazing. And we weren't supposed to go back up in there, but a couple of us did. And then she just kept walking back, and she took about an extra 15 minutes and didn't care. That's her. But that's a whole rabbit trail just to tell you this. You kind of get an idea of how big the tomb isn't, right? There it is. Okay, so to give you an idea, this we went to before. I'll come back to that other tomb here in just a second. But before we went there, we went to this place right here. Yeah, there we go. To this place right here. It's what it's designed to do is to show you what first century tombs look like, so that you could actually you don't have to get into it. You could just see, right? So this is a part of a tomb. It's got these bars, so you couldn't get in there. I'll show you a picture of what's in there in a minute. But this place also had, which was really cool, it had a tomb that the top had been excavated off. So you could stand outside and look down at the tomb and see what a first century tomb would look like. And there we are kind of looking at it. This is our whole group here. Let's see. I can't tell. Oh, there I am, right there. I always kind of stood in the back because I'm tall and I didn't want to get in people's way. So, anyway, that's a picture of the tomb. There it is. From another view, you can see how they've just kind of chopped the top of it off. When they entered the tomb, so this is back to Mary and Mary. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. The women were shocked, but the angel said, "Don't be alarmed. You were looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He isn't here. He's risen from the dead. Look, this is where they laid his body. Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you before he died." So, this is not the tomb that they laid Jesus in. I showed you that picture a few minutes ago. But when they walk in, see, they would have had to duck down and go in. This is probably 4 feet, maybe 5. So you'd be hunched over unless you were very short. And then there are these carved-in benches. And what they would do in the first century for burial custom was you would take the person, you would wrap their body, not quite mummify it the way that the Egyptians did. They didn't drain them and refill them with, they weren't mummifying them to preserve them. What they did, though, is they wrapped them in cloth, packed with all of this, this myrrh and these other spices and aloe and stuff to make the decomposition process go a little bit faster and a little bit smoother, and it wouldn't stink quite as bad. That's what the myrrh was kind of for. And so they would wrap the person's body, they would drag them through the entrance of the tomb, and they would lay the body on one of these benches. And this was a large tomb. This would have been a family tomb. And you can see these things here. These are not entrances to other tombs. These are, it's like a crypt, I guess you'd call it. They're niches. And what they do is after they have, so they come back after, say, a year. And the body has decomposed, and it is just a bunch of bones at this point inside of this wrapped fabric. So what they do is they take these little boxes, they're called ossuaries, and they pick up the bones and they drop them into the ossuaries. They put a little lid on it, looks like a little coffin almost, and then they slide the ossuary into the crypt, into the niches, and over the course of a couple of generations, all of those would be filled. And a lot of times what they would do if they weren't wealthy is they would then take one of the larger niches and they would take a larger bone box and they would pile all of the bones from an entire family together in one box, which is where in the Old Testament when they talk about so-and-so was gathered to his fathers, that's kind of what they're saying that they gathered all of his bones and they put them in the box with, they put Jacob's bones in the box with Isaac and Abraham. And so that's kind of what's going on there. There's the bench. And so when the angel says, come see where they laid him, that's what they would have been looking at. And you would have had the grave clothes just kind of scattered around, dropped on the ground, but the cloth that went over the face folded nicely and neatly. No idea why Jesus, wasn't terribly careful about the main grave clothes, but he was very, very precise with the face handkerchief. I don't know. That's from up above. You can see Jerusalem in the background. Beautiful spot, absolutely beautiful. And we had this young man with us named Kyron. He was 18. This was his graduation present, and I was blown away that an 18-year-old would ask for this for their graduation present, and that he would come all by himself. But they asked him to come down, and he laid down like you would, they would have laid down a body. Now, our guide, he did not like being interrupted. Hold on. He didn't like being interrupted. And if he was, you could tell it very much perturbed him. And so we were in Galilee once, and the birds could be very loud, especially the parakeets. There are these big, giant green parakeets that made this loud squawk. And several times they just seemed to be following us, and that really bothered him. And on this day, we're sitting there, and Kyron's laying down. It had rained, and so it was wet. Kyron wasn't terribly pleased to be laying down on the wet bench, but he did it. But he got up early. Before our guide could say, Kyron, arise, right? I could tell he was working up to a big finish, and Kyron got up early and he was bummed. But the reason Kyron got up, and one of the reasons why David was distracted from dropping his joke, is in that niche right there, right after this, a cat comes bounding out. And somebody, I don't know who, I'm not gonna narc on the person that did it, said, "It's alive," and everybody laughed. They thought that was pretty funny. It was funny just the cat coming out. There were cats everywhere in Israel, everywhere. No matter where you went, there were cats. I've got pictures. One of the recurring themes in my pictures from Israel is Jonathan, kneeling down, petting a cat. I think that and the food were his two favorite things about going to Israel. But the cat came bounding out of there, and that was pretty funny. But that'll give you an idea of what, come and see where he was laid. He even looks like, they got me. Okay. Earlier I showed you a picture as we were going in, and it was like you could see this kind of hill, and in the side a wall had been built, and there were bars in it. As we walked past this place, the only reason I saw it and the only reason I knew is because this is another one of those times that Michael Card happened to be walking next to me. And he goes, "You want to see the coolest thing here?" And I'm like, "Of course." Always. And so he takes me over to this place and he goes, see all that stuff in there? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, those are ossuaries. Those are bone boxes. And so when I was telling you about the bone boxes and how they would put them in these niches, this is what those bone boxes looked like. These are pretty well preserved ones. But, you could see some that were large, some that were very small, that were for babies, obviously. So, just to give you an idea. There he is laying down again. That's from up above. Now here we are back again at that garden tomb outside of the city of Jerusalem. She's kind of got her back to it. This is the top. If I stood up here, I'd be standing on the top of the tomb. And there it is again. Just to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like. Okay, so this goes back many days from what I just showed you. This is in Bethany. This is Lazarus's tomb. I think maybe this was the first day. And so you would have had to have seen the first one, which, by the way, if you want to see all the old ones, just go back and they're all on the Facebook page under the playlist of Israel Travelogue. But this is from day one, and this is somebody coming out of Lazarus's tomb. Now, this is not exactly the same kind of tomb. This is this whole structure. I mean, we had to walk down. It's like catacombs almost. So it's different than Jesus' tomb. But when you get inside, you get an idea of the size of it. There I was inside of the tomb. Somebody had cut a hole so that you could kind of get an idea. There I am coming out of it. And there's my friends again standing there at the garden tomb itself. Again, not the one Jesus was laid in. This was one that was made for one of Herod's family members. But it is a first century tomb. Almost assuredly, this is what Jesus' tomb looked like. And there I am standing on the stone. Just to give you... So when they're saying, who's going to roll the stone away? This is what they're talking about. It's in a channel. And they would have had to use a great big stick. Probably would have taken 3 or 4 very big guys. And it would roll behind this archway here. And it would basically, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was even back there. It's exactly the same shape. It's just amazing workmanship. It's like it looks kind of rough now. It's 2,000 years old. Give it a break, right? But that's the garden tomb. And there we all are. See, that's Bruce, and not Bruce. Shoot. I can't believe I forgot his name. Anyway, he was awesome. And he's standing down, he went down the steps and is standing, and there's the top of the thing. Kind of comes up to kind of his shoulders. But that'll just kind of give you an idea. We sang, see, remember when I told you that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre didn't really do it for me? Because it just seems so gaudy, and it seems so... I always thought of it as like Christian Disneyland. You know, you go and you stand in long lines, and there's there's gear that you can buy, and those things didn't usually do it for me. I was glad to see them. I was fascinated as I learned more about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but it was so crowded when we were there. It was hard to really wrap my brain around what I was seeing. This place here. This place was meaningful to me. And this is a picture of us afterwards. Michael, who's standing back here, with Kyron, the kid that was laying down on the tomb bench. Michael kind of took him under his wing. I guess Kyron's mom is a close friend of Michael's, and so he was with. Usually, most pictures you see of the group, Michael's going to be standing next to Kyron. And then me and Jonathan are back there. But this is after. We sat back kind of back in this area, behind there, on some steps. And Michael did some teaching revolving around the resurrection. And then we sang some songs. And we sang the song, How Deep the Father's Love for Us, how vast beyond all measure, that He would give His only Son and make a wretch His treasure. A gorgeous song. And sitting there that day, and we were tired, so when you're tired, it's a lot easier to reach a person's emotions when they're tired. We were exhausted. That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever done. And if you ever think about going to Israel, first of all, it still blows my mind that I got to do it and that this church sent me there. I mean, it just floors me. But if you ever get a chance to do it, this is the entire group of us. There's about 25, 26 of us. Now, it had shrunk a little bit by then because I've told people in the past that there was some kind of an upper respiratory sickness that was more contagious than anything anybody, every single one of us got it. It didn't knock all of us out, but this lady missed 2 days. Let's see, where is she? There's a lady right here, this lady, her husband missed 5 days. This older gentleman, where is he? This guy right here, he missed 3 days. And so that guy missed 4 days. So, it's like a whole bunch of us got sick. And I have no idea why I was telling you that. Huh. Oh, because this is us. Okay, this is our group. It is smaller now than it was when we started. There's probably 4 people that aren't represented in this picture because they're sick. Did they have corona? We don't know. There was a group from South Korea that was at the same resort in Galilee as we were in, that when they got back to South Korea, they all tested positive for corona, but we might have. Anyway, if you ever go to Israel, go with a small group, because we had one bus. We would pull up to these holy sites, and we would all get off, and it seemed like a lot of us, right? 25, 23, 27, depending on how many people were actually there that day. But we would sometimes, as we were leaving, see a tour come that was like 10 buses for one tour. And they would all pile off of their buses. And so 10 buses times, say, 20, 30 people in each bus. You kind of get an idea of how many people are in these tours. And they would just kind of crowd around all of these sites trying to get a picture. And I just thought, man, thank God. I had heard of Michael Card and his tour group that he took and how he took small groups because of these massive groups. It's like, I saw that Max Lucado is doing a tour in 2021. And at first, that was my dream, was to go with Max Lucado. After I went on this tour, I started looking into that, and I was like, I'll bet he's got like 500 people in his tour. Because it's like Max Lucado speaking and Chris Tomlin doing the worship leading. And I'm just like, oh no, Matthew West this time. Matthew West doing the worship leading this time. I was just like, holy smokes. But anyway, it was phenomenal. Next week, I'll be showing you pictures. We'll go back to when we were in Galilee and time spent at Nazareth and the Church of the Annunciation is what it was called. The announcing that Mary was indeed pregnant. And Jesus's hometown and kind of some of the things around there. But for this week, that's it. And God bless everybody. Thanks for sticking around with me and watching my boring slideshow of my all-time favorite vacation that I've ever had in my entire life. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Stay safe. Be healthy. Oh, wrong mouse. All right. Right mouse.